Hi, welcome back to part 9 of a series of videos on Firearm Basics, specifically in reference to self-defense. If you haven't watched the previous videos, please go back and at least watch the first video where we talked about safety and how to not accidentally shoot yourself or an innocent person. That's the most important video in the series. If you haven't watched it, please go back and watch it. Now, we're going to be talking in this video about the different types of ammunition. I'm going to assume everyone already watched the video about ammunition components, and I don't need to explain any of that. If you haven't, please go back and watch that video. Okay, you're still here, so let's talk. First up, for a piece of vocabulary, just so we're all on the same page, let's talk about the meaning of the word caliber. What the technical meaning of the word caliber is the diameter of the bullet. I need more color. Yeah, I have more colors. Let's use brown. The technical meaning of the word caliber is the diameter of the bullet, so like from there to there, in hundredths of an inch. So a 35 caliber bullet would be 35 hundredths of an inch wide. A 50 caliber bullet would be 50 hundredths of an inch wide, or half an inch. 22 caliber, obviously 22 hundredths, a little under a quarter of an inch wide. Now, that's the technical meaning. What most people will use it to do is to refer to the entire cartridge type. There's a lot more to what goes into a cartridge than just that one measurement. Like, the overall length of the cartridge is important. The length of the case from here to there is important. How the cutouts on the side for the extractor is important. Basically, when you buy a gun, you'll find out what caliber it is. The guns I recommended in a previous video are all 9mm, and it's worth mentioning that 9mm is frequently referred to as 9x19 because it's 9mm wide and usually 19mm long. So occasionally you'll see it referred to as 9x19. I think all the Glock 9mm slides actually say 9x19 on the slide. You'll occasionally also see it called 9mm Luger because it was a cartridge first made famous by the Luger pistols, and you'll also occasionally see it referred to as 9mm Parabellum. I think 9mm Parabellum is the technical name, but when you go to buy ammo, if you're not sure, ask, because there's multiple different types of 9mm cartridges, and one of the things with caliber is not always, like, the number isn't really the caliber in all cases. For example, 380 ACP is not a 380 caliber or a 38 caliber, it's actually a 35.4 caliber. People just like 380 when they were naming things. So anyways, let's start talking about bullets. Let's start from the back. You'll almost never see anyone talk about differences in primer, and occasionally you'll hear boxer primed or large primers versus small primers, rifle primers versus pistol primers. When you're buying factory boxed ammunition, you're buying a box of ammo at your store, it's probably not going to mention anything about the primer. What you do want to take note of, though, is the case. Traditionally, cases are made out of brass. Brass will nicely hold your bullet and everything you need, and it will expand slightly to fill the entire chamber as the gunpowder burns. Generally, you'll see brass cases. What you'll see a lot of times with ammunition coming out of former Soviet countries is steel cases. This was just because in that part of the world, steel is a whole lot easier to get. Generally, I would avoid steel cased ammunition like this case in front of me. You have a couple of problems with it, we'll go over it. Part of it is rusting, part of it's extra wear on the gun because you've got steel on steel. Part of it is because it doesn't expand. And generally, this kind of stuff, there's some other corners cut in the pricing. What you will also see occasionally with cases is these silver cases, and these are frequently on self-defense rounds. It's a brass case plated in nickel. And the idea behind that is the smooth nickel plating makes it easier for the whole cartridge to be pulled out of the barrel by the action. And you get slightly more reliable cycling because of that. There's just less friction on it, it's easier to pull out. So the chance of a jam is significantly less with something like this. Is it all that significant? My experience, I've never noticed brass cases causing problems when nickel-plated cases wouldn't have. I've never noticed brass cases causing a problem at all. So that, the nickel plating, it's a nice to have, but I don't really consider it that important. What you will also see with a lot of practice ammo, what you'll see with a lot of practice ammo like this, is that case is actually aluminum. Now, that's a soft, weak metal, if anyone's familiar with metallurgy. The advantage of aluminum is it's cheap, and for a case that's going to get used once and then thrown out, the fact that aluminum is cheaper than brass saves you a little money. And I've shot probably close to 14,000 rounds of aluminum cased ammunition, and I've never had a problem with an aluminum case failing. So for practice ammo, I would not hesitate to buy aluminum cased ammo. It's worth mentioning though, you can take a brass case, and if you have the right equipment, you can actually reuse these. You can pop the primer out, put a new primer in, clean up the brass, resize it, trim it a little bit, refill it with gunpowder, put a new bullet on there, and basically reload this case with all new components. I personally don't do that. Getting started in that costs about $200 just for the equipment, not counting the bullets and the gunpowder and the primers. And then you've got to actually do the work, and frankly, I got better things to do with my time, like record YouTube videos. So I personally don't reload. So anyways, let's now move on to the bullet. And we're using a diagram over here just to show you the rest. What you'll see, and this is most common for practice ammo or just any cheap ammo, is what's called full metal jacket. And here's an example of a full metal jacket cartridge. What this means, that your bullet is made out of a soft lead material. So that, we're going to use a picture. Basically, this part of the bullet is soft lead. And when they manufacture the bullet, they insert it into a piece of copper from the front, and that results in a copper jacket on the front of the bullet. Just a very thin sheet of copper all the way around the front, and they call this a full metal jacket. Almost never will you see the jacket cover all the way around. If it does, those are frequently referred to as a total metal jacket. But these are the cheapest ammo you can get. You may kind of think of a military context when you hear Full Metal Jacket. It's a great movie made that was called Full Metal Jacket. Yes, the military uses this, but mostly because it's cheap. For practicing at the range, Full Metal Jacket is probably what you want because, once again, it is cheap. Next thing you'll see a lot of is hollow points. What this is, a couple things are different with that. Generally, on a hollow point round, it's a lead round with a copper jacket, usually. Sometimes they'll use different materials, like that's a hollow point with a brass jacket. It's a Remington Golden Saber. And as you can see, they basically made the tip of the bullet is hollow, and your jacket's put on from the back instead of the front. The idea with a hollow point bullet is when this bullet hits something, okay, I know this is kind of sad to say, but basically when that hits flesh, the idea is that center part of the bullet will fill up with muscle, blood, tissue, things like that. And as the bullet goes forward, draw another picture. As our bullet as the bullet is traveling forward through the target, going that way, and the hollow opening fills with blood, as it's going forward, the stuff that's filling in there will exert a pressure to the sides once it's full. So that will push that way, that'll push that way, and that causes the hollow point bullet to just open up. And your bullet will expand from being 9mm, for example, just 35 caliber roughly, instead of being this shape, as it fills up and that pressure is exerted, the wings kind of open up like that. And instead of being our base 35 caliber, you might have this become about a 70 caliber. And sorry, this is kind of gruesome. In flesh, you're more likely to hit a vital organ on your target simply because the bullet's wider. You know, if the vital organ's over here, the fact that the bullet's now wider means you just nicked something important, where if the bullet didn't expand, you wouldn't have had that. In addition, you can tell when the bullet expands like that, it becomes much less aerodynamic, and you tend to, instead of having friction on just this part here, you know, your 9mm, now that it's expanded to twice the width, you're getting friction across the entire surface, so the bullet tends to stop faster and doesn't penetrate as much. The reason that matters in a lot of cases is bullets, like that bullet there, will go through someone, completely through. Like from the front, out the back, and then go through the guy behind him. So for a self-defense round, that's a bad thing because you don't want to shoot the bad guy and accidentally shoot the person behind him, potentially in the room behind him, and hurt an innocent person. So for self-defense, hollow points are wonderful. Now, all hollow points are not created equal. When you go to buy a specific brand, you want to look into some tests that have been done on those particular cartridges. Usually they'll shoot it into a block of gelatin they call ballistic gel and measure how deeply it penetrates into that gel. Generally you want something that penetrates about 12 inches into calibrated ballistic gel, and you can do lots of reading on reviews and probably find a YouTube video with a particular cartridge you want being shot into gel and somebody measuring it. So when you go to buy ammo, don't just go, it's a hollow point, it's good. You really want to look into that specific model of hollow point. Frankly, if you want a suggestion, this is what I usually carry. It's Hornady Critical Defense, and I think it's 105 grain. It's a really light bullet, 115 grain. Grain is the weight of the bullet. It's just a unit for measuring weight. And there's also what's starting to make it onto the market. Usually these are advertised as just hollow points. I generally call them filled hollow points. The basic idea is you've got a hollow point cartridge, and then that hollow opening at the front is filled with something. In the case of what's in my hand, it's like some kind of rubber. You look closely at that. It looks like a pencil eraser inside the hollow cavity. The benefit of something like that with a filled hollow point is if your target is, say, wearing clothes, there's no chance whatsoever of that hollow point getting clogged up with denim or cotton shirt, whatever, not expanding. So that's kind of a way to deal with that. Also, you have a slight benefit if you miss your target in a wall, since that's already full of a material that will force it to expand. You'll start getting a little bit of expansion when you go through a wall, and obviously not much because... Okay, I just found a stud, but regular residential construction drywall is not going to do much to expand a bullet. It's going to sail right through that. But it's a little bit of expansion and reduces your chances of hitting an innocent person just a little bit. So that's why I personally like them. Obviously, do your own research on the specific cartridge that you're looking at buying. One other thing, and this is not something that I'd recommend for most people, but I tend to do a lot of hiking in the woods. And I'm in an area where boar are common, and what you can get is what's called a hard cast bullet. This is a lead bullet. This is Buffalo Boar brand, if you're wondering. And basically it's a completely solid hunk of lead at the front, and the way the lead is manufactured and treated, it makes it harder. So lead's normally a soft material. When you hit flesh, the bullet will break up and not penetrate as far. It'll still penetrate pretty well, but not as far. If you're worried about stopping something like a wild boar, which has a much denser bone structure than a human, and you may need to crack some of those bones. You may need to punch through the armor on the shoulders. Boars are pretty tough. Having a very hard bullet, heavy and hard, will help the bullet penetrate deeper through them. This is not something you want to carry around people, because this will penetrate very deeply. That it goes goes through your target and the person behind him and the person behind him and the person behind him. So you don't carry something like this in a residential area. But if you're out backpacking, it's a nice choice. And as you can see, I keep a couple magazines loaded with that. So that's it for your basic bullet types. Full metal jacket, talked about hollow points, talked about hard cast ammo. Yeah, pretty much it. Let's continue on in the next video. Quick addendum on steel cased ammunition. You'll see this occasionally for sale at a really good price. Generally this is made in former Soviet countries and shipped to the US, and it's cheap because they manufacture it cheaply over there. And they're using steel for the cases. I would not recommend buying any of this stuff. There's beyond the fact that the case is not the big issue, and sometimes they're covered in a lacquer and they're more of a brownish color than this one. The problem is the jacket around it. So we mentioned before, most of these bullets have a copper jacket around them. With most steel-cased ammunition, that jacket is a alloy of something like copper and also more steel, because that keeps the price down. Steel's relatively cheap. Having that steel bullet push down a steel barrel will wear out your barrel faster. It increases the amount of wear on your barrel by about 300%. So normally you can fire up, depending on the barrel, somewhere around 15,000 rounds through a barrel before you wear it out. If you're shooting steel cased, it's more like 5,000 rounds. That's still a lot, unless you're doing serious competition, target shooting, something like that. You probably won't wear out a barrel, but just be aware, it's cheaper, it will wear out your gun faster. They also sometimes will not put as much gunpowder in it, and you can have problems with there not being enough energy to cycle the action. I've never personally seen a stuck round, but it is possible for the bullet to get stuck halfway down the barrel, and if that happens, it's called a squib load, and you fire a second bullet behind it when the barrel's already obstructed, it'll generally, the two bullets will hit inside the barrel. All that pressure behind is going to escape back out the gun, sometimes out the side of the barrel, and generally things will break. Generally, by having a firearm in your hands in front of you, blow up in your hands and causing you serious injuries. I've only seen that happen once. Generally with pistols, it'll destroy the firearm, but the shooter's okay. With rifles, you're probably going to need an ambulance very quickly. So generally I'd avoid steel-cased ammunition just because of the quality issues around the manufacturing of it, and also the extra wear on the barrel.